Hi, I am Reg Hartt, and it's a pleasure. In 1968, in Ottawa, I was browsing in an Anglican church used bookstore, and I bought a book on the occult, on ESP and out-of-body experiences and stuff like that. And the woman I gave my money to said, if you're interested in that, there's a group meeting tonight and you should check them out. So she gave me the address, and I went home and dropped a hit of acid and walked over and found the place that she had told me about, and went in and sat down at the back of a room that filled up with about 125 people. And eventually, not too long after, a woman got up and started to speak at the front, and she identified herself as Dr. Winifred Barton. And she was short, squat, built like a washing machine, and she claimed to have had an Atlantean spirit guide who had dictated a shelf load of books through her. She pointed to the books. And she spoke, and as she spoke, I looked around the room at the people in there with me, and on my right by the exit door, I saw a man in a red plaid shirt who, when he caught my eyes on him, did like they do in the transformer beams in the TV show Star Trek, and just faded from view. I thought, that's interesting. So I kept my eye on that spot, and I saw him 2 more times for a total of 3. And after about an hour, there was an intermission. And I went up and spoke to the woman who had been speaking, and I told her what I'd seen. She said, wait here, and she left the room. She came back with a photograph, and she said, is that the man? I said, yes, that's the man. She said, well, that's the caretaker. He died yesterday. Where you saw him was his favorite place to sit during our meetings. Well, that didn't shock me or surprise me. It was just new information. What did shock me and what did surprise me were the words that she said after that. She said, would you like to speak to the group after the break? Now, who invites an absolute stranger to come in and take over their podium, their central spot, you know? That just doesn't happen. Could you imagine Billy Graham or Ernst Angley or the Pope or the President of the United States of America or your high school principal, high school teacher, or anyone? Can you imagine anyone? Some famous author. Can you imagine Jordan Peterson saying, oh, would you like to take over the podium? Would you like to speak to these people? Well, she did that. So I got up and I said, well, I've been invited to speak to you, and I didn't know what I was going to speak about, but I see you've got someone coming here in a couple of months to talk to you about LSD, and I'm on it right now. So I'll talk to you about that. So for about an hour, I spoke about my experiences with LSD, and when I got through, the people who are enthused, grandmothers, thought that I should marry their daughters, and they invited me to be a member of the group. So, I hung out there for about a year, and I studied ESP, and I had out-of-body experiences and saw auras and all that stuff. But the problem was that they were against the things that I was enjoying, which was drugs and sex and booze and good company and music, and they were a pretty straight-laced crew. So they finally gave me an ultimatum. I had to shape up or ship out. And when people tell you to shape up or ship out, you've only got one choice, and that is to ship out. And there were a group of people that had come there and gotten involved on account of I was there, and they looked at me for an answer as we went home to where I was staying, at my uncle's place. My uncle was Aldous Huxley. He was Director General of Public Works Canada under Pierre Trudeau. Anyway, I brought them home and set them all down and put on a record by a tremendous singer named Judy Henske that I had discovered in Toronto. And she sings this song called the Salvation Army song. And then she stops and, well, here's what she says. Brothers and sisters, before I joined the Salvation Army, I used to drink a quart of gin a day. And people applauded and cheered, and she said, and I used to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. And they go, hurrah, hurrah. And she said, I used to lie in the gutter with men. And they go, hurrah. And she goes, thank you, brothers. But then she said, since I joined the Salvation Army, I no longer drink a quart of gin a day. And they go, boo, boo, boo. She says, and I no longer smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. And they go, boo, boo, boo. And she says, and I gulp, no longer lie in the gutter with men. She says, all I do is stand hill and beat this goddamn drum. And that's it, you know? All these people that want you to shape up and stop smoking and drinking and having a good time, lying in the gutter with people you'd like to lie in the gutter with. What you wind up with is standing on a corner beating a big bass goddammit drum. And who the hell needs that except those people that are so timid in their souls, that's what they're going to consign their lives to doing. Now, I'm going to tell you a few things here, and some of it you might not like, but it's all going to be true. First off, I'm going to tell you, one of the best books you can get about this subject is Andrew Weil, MD, The Natural Mind. This man discovered pot through reading about its bad influence on young people in a newspaper when he was a young person, and his first thought was, I gotta check that out. And usually that's the first thought of all of us. We read these things damning something, and our first thought is, I gotta check that out for myself. That sounds interesting. Well, it is. It is damned interesting. One night in the 1970s, I dropped acid, and my first thought was, from the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. And then came, why don't you kill yourself? There's nothing new. Now, most people panic. They call that a bad trip when they get a thought like that. I don't. I welcome bad trips, man. You bring them on, for Christ's sake. And I thought to myself, well, I got to do something new. Now, at that time, they had just come up with paper plates for offset printing with ink, not like today's Xerox copies and things. And paper plates were cheap, which made offset printing commercially available for a lot of people, but they couldn't handle photographs. You had to have either dotted pictures cut from newspapers, or I would draw an image of the film I was going to show in black and white on a piece of paper and use that for the graphic. And one day, this girl asked me, why don't you use shading in your artwork? And I said, well, I don't know how. I've never studied. And that night, on acid, when I decided that I had to do something, I decided to do shading on a piece of art for the first time. Now, the nice thing about acid is it just completely blows everything out of the water. We become calm, and well, if you don't freak out, well, I don't freak out. You become calm in the center, and it's cool. And I took the movie The Son of the Sheik with Rudolph Valentino, and I ran it through till I found the image I liked, and then I stopped framed it and penciled it out. And then I spent the next 8 hours of that trip doing what's called stipple work for the very first time. That's cross-hatching, crossing little lines, and dotting and shading. And I'd never done that before, but because I had my focus intently on this, and if you see stuff, people tell you that you can't control yourself on acid, and you see artists doing work on acid, and it's always something like a spider gone crazy, no whatever, just, well, this is it. This is the actual image which I drew. Now, I'm going to hold it up here for you to take a look at it. Now you look at that and you see all those dots and those little lines crossing each other. That sucker took me the whole, 12 hours really. I said 8 on the flyer, but 12 hours of that trip to do. And it saved my life because it gave me something to do. And only that, I learned how to do shading. So I did a whole bunch of posters just like that, not copies of that, but a whole bunch of posters of different things that I liked to use for my images on my posters. And it led to a whole new way of seeing and discovering. That's the beautiful thing about LSD that few people talk about. The fact that every time we do it, it leads to a new way of seeing, a new way of hearing, a new way of experiencing life. And these new waves lead to a new us, to an actual rebirth and resurrection. Our old self dies and our new self emerges from the shell of our old body. Now, one of the great problems in our culture is that we are at the mercy of a school system based on the Austrian model created by a man named Johann Fichte. And it's was created in Austria, actually, to create fodder for the armies of Europe, men who would obey but wouldn't think for themselves. And Johann Fichte said it's impossible to erase the disobedience gene in people who've learned to think for themselves. Now, you've heard that rebellion is bad. We should all be good boys and girls. Well, God help the people who believe that, because rebellion is a sign of intelligence. It's not a sin, it's a sign of intelligence. And you think about it. Moses rebelled against Pharaoh. Jesus rebelled against the Pharisees and the scribes and the high muck and mucks of his day. Every great human being has rebelled against the conventions of his day. Galileo said, look, I'm sorry, but the sun doesn't go around the earth goes around the sun. And they said, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And of course we know that he was right, and they damn near killed him for it. And some people do get killed for their rebellion, but rebels are very important. They are the new thinkers emerging out of the great sea of humanity, and every one of them is as precious as a diamond, and they should know that. Now, this is a book I want you to get, and you can download this off the web. It's called The Underground History of American Education. It's by a man named John Taylor Gatto. And Mr. Gatto got an award twice, New York State Teacher of the Year, and he's now doing everything in his power to encourage young people to stay out of school. And I'm doing that with every ounce of my being. Please stay out of school. David Mamet, the great film producer, writer, director, in his book True and False states, invent nothing, deny nothing, stand up, speak up, stay out of school. I'm with him. Now, it happened that my high school principal told me one day in the middle of my last year, grade 13, you've got the wrong attitude. If you leave this school today, you will starve in 2 weeks. Well, here am I, 17, and I'm terrified about what's going to happen. Well, grade 13, so I had 13 to 6. Okay, I'm 19, okay? 19 years old. Maybe 20, because I was 20, because I just missed a year on account of French. In New Brunswick, we had a really hot French teacher, and we all were eager to learn French. She used to sit up on the desk and cross her legs, and we would attempt to see paradise. And she made us excited about French, but unfortunately, she was married and pregnant, and when time came for her to have a baby, she didn't come to teach us anymore, and we got this old woman. She was as old as the Appalachian Mountains. And if she ever had any vigor and vitality and vim in her life, it had long ago been bleached out. And the entire class lost our enthusiasm en masse for French, which was unfortunate, because if we had the other teacher, I would have continued and loved to have learned French. Never underestimate the importance of sex. My friend Judith Merrill, the mother of modern science fiction, Judy called it speculative fiction, was fond of saying we only really learn in conversation after sex. And Judy had some of the best teachers you could ever hope for in conversation after sex. So if you don't want to have sex with your teachers, then stay the hell away from them, because they're useless. But anyway, I met Judy in 1968. I had a small space at the end of Yorkville on Yonge Street, just above a pool hall. It was 39 steps above a pool hall. I could have called it the 39 Steps after the film that made Alfred Hitchcock famous, but I called it the Public Enemy after the film that made James Cagney a star, because in 1968 I was a young fag. I weighed 125 pounds. Now I'm an old fag. And fags were public enemy number one. So, I was saying, here I am, public enemy fucking number one. How do you like that in 1968, when it was still illegal to be queer, and all the good queers had parties at home, and all the bad queers came downtown. And the bad queers downtown in the bars were fantastic people that you'd want to know. And then Trudeau ruined it, just like they've ruined pot, by making it legal. And then all the bad queers came downtown and hung out and killed the scene. And you know, a friend of mine who used to deal in pot said, well, I'm using my credit card to practice my religion. I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm using it to buy dope. He says, and the dope that I'm buying, I wouldn't have dared sell it to anybody when I was dealing. Well, there you have it. See, when you start making things legal, you get god-awful shit. Lord, god-awful prices. It ain't worth the price you're paying for it. It's terrible. But anyway, here I am showing movies and giving talks just like I do today. It's 1968, Toronto. And this is when Yorkville was Yorkville, not the embalmed corpse it's become today. And the summer before, the CTV and CBC on the late night news had ran stories of clubs in Yorkville where people like Joni Mitchell and all kinds of other great musicians were singing and playing, and it was fun. And these clubs got busted for marijuana. And this was like a giant commercial all across Canada to every boy and girl in the country with the least amount of juice in their bellies to come to Toronto and party and hang out in 1968. And Yorkville was full of literally thousands of young people from all across Canada, eager to get stoned and do lots of wrong in the best possible way. And 1968 was also the year of the student riots in Paris, France, over the expulsion of Henri Langlois from the Paris Cinematheque. Oh, it was an incredible year. It was the year that LSD became available on the streets of every city in the world because Timothy Leary, God bless his heart, felt that everyone should be able to have access to this amazing chemical. Now, film star Cary Grant, his real name was Archie Leach, he was an English Cockney. He took LSD. He was one of the biggest stars in the history of the movies. And he was a self-made person. And Cary Grant took LSD. And he said, LSD is a chemical, not a drug. People who take drugs are trying to escape their lives. People who take LSD are looking into their lives. And I can't agree with that 100% because a lot of people just take LSD to party and they mix it with all kinds of other shit just to get super stoned. When, why ruin it by putting all this other crap on top of it? It's such a great thing, take it pure or don't take it at all, for God's sake. But, if you feel like you want to do that, I'm not saying don't do it. Do what you want to do until you figure out that it's better on its own. And it is. So anyway, some kids came to my program, and they were from a place called Rochdale College, which I'd never heard of. But they spoke about a woman in residence there that I had heard of from the year's best collections of science fiction, the year's best SF, which she edited, and her name was Judith Merrill. Now, I didn't know then that Judy was the mother of modern science fiction. I just knew that she was a fine editor, and the stories that she chose were first-rate, and her brief introductions to those stories were even better. So I went over to Rochdale College, pre-punk, 1968, I'm 22, dressed head to foot in black, rail thin. And I met Judy. And she told me 30 years later that I scared the shit out of her. But I had copies on 8mm film of motion pictures like The Cabin Dr. Caligari, The Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, Metropolis, The Phantom of the Opera with Lon Chaney, the first films of Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that. And Judy said to me, "You belong here." And I said, "Where's here?" She said, "Rochdale, you belong here." Now, I had started studying a Chinese oracle called the I Ching in 1968 as well. I was walking home at midnight, drunk out of my mind, which is a good place to be. And I sat in the middle of Queen's Park waiting for someone to come along that I might have some fun with. And along came a fella who sat down and we talked. And he asked me if it was okay to sleep in the park. And I said, well, it's supposed to rain. If you haven't got a place to stay, you can be arrested for being a vagrant. Why? He said, well, my dad said my way or the highway. Well, obviously he'd made the right choice, and instantly I fell in love with him. And I said, well, you can come with me, but before you do, you should know that I'm sleeping on the balcony of a one-bedroom apartment filled with a ton of other people. We're all waiting to move into a house, and we're all queer. Now, nobody's going to bother you, but you should know that before you walk in, so you don't get scared. So I bring him home, and I hadn't really seen him in the dark, and I told him I wasn't going to bother him. And the rest of the people in the place, they just popped right up and all made moves. And I thought, well, if he wants to go with one of these people, that's his business. And we got out on that balcony, and he says to me, I've never done this before. And I said, well, as far as I know, you're not doing it now. And he said, you don't understand. I want to. So we did. And we became great friends, because that first person that you bond with sexually, you bond with for life. You should know that, And years later, Spider-Man 2 comes out, and I'm going to see it. And all of a sudden, the movie became banal beyond description. I just couldn't stand another second of it. I had to get out of the theater, and I came home, and a day later, I got a phone call from his sister, and she told me that he died the day that I was watching Spider-Man and just had to get the hell out of that movie. So I'm telling you that first person you make it with, you bond with for life. So you make sure that first person you make it with is someone you want to bond with for life. And that should be the person that chance brings to you, because you'll always pick the wrong one. Anyway, he took me to a party, and I saw a fellow on the floor with a book in his lap with a cover the color of gold. And I said, what's that? He said, it's called the I Ching. So next day I bought my first copy of it, and the I Ching teaches that if learning and doing are separate, then learning and doing become dead, sterile, that they must be one. And this is important, because when I asked Judy what Rochdale was about, Judy explained to me that Rochdale College had started out as a student high-rise created by Campus Co-op at U of T, and along the way they decided to make it into an experiment in alternate education, hopefully get a break on their taxes. And the Rochdale idea was that each Rochdalian was called to be their own teacher. There were no teachers at Rochdale College. What they did was they brought in people who'd achieved success in different fields to be what they called resource people, and Judy, being the mother of modern science fiction and an editor and all sorts of other, and a writer and all sorts of other things, was there as a resource person. And she wasn't there to teach, but she was there to talk with you and answer questions if you chose to. Now, truth be told, many people just chose to live at Rochdale because it was cheap rent, and they didn't make access of the tremendous people there as a resource. And when they did it all wrong, because they kept looking for wisdom. And wisdom is something that you can't learn from people. You learn it from life, and you learn it when you get burnt. Getting burnt, going into the fire consciously and allowing ourselves to become one with the flame, just like those three men in the Bible. Walked into that furnace, they were put in that furnace, and the flame, like the burning bush, Well, we become that flame. Anyway, the Rochdale idea appealed to me, the idea of being your own teacher, because it's what the I Ching taught, and it's what I felt to be true myself anyway. And now another woman had come to my program at the Public Enemy, a very important woman. I was showing Lon Chaney in the original Phantom of the Opera in 1920, the original Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1923. And it was a rainy Saturday, and I didn't think anybody would come out, but I thought, well, you better go, just in case. So I went over, and there was a family waiting outside, a mother, a father, their two sons, and their daughter. And they introduced themselves as Robert and Jane Jacobs. And Mrs. Jacobs walked into my space, and the first thing she said was, this is just like Cinema 16 in New York. Now, don't worry about it. We're getting to LSD, but I want to give you the foundation for why my experience with LSD was probably unique, one of a kind, and the only one in the world, and one that I want you to embrace. And Mrs. Jacobs and her family came to my screenings every week after that, and we became great friends. And when I started my program at Rochdale College, She was a regular there. And one day I saw her picture in the paper and discovered that she'd written a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which is the most important book you can read on cities. And I bought a copy of it and read it. And in Mrs. Jacobs said, I had great teachers in the first and second grades who taught me everything I know. After that, the teachers were nice, but they were dopes. Well, not all my teachers after my first and second grades were dopes, but most of them were. My mom was Church of England, my dad was Roman Catholic, and when I got to be 6, there was a big battle between my mom and my dad's family about whether I go to Catholic school or public school. And my mom finally said, why don't we let him decide? No one could argue with that. And she got me home by herself late at night and said, do you want to go to Catholic school with the bad kids or public school with the good kids? So you can guess where I went. And I came home from school the first day and I got a great lesson from life. All my Catholic cousins were waiting for me at the top of the hill with sticks, stones, and names. And they called me queer. And I didn't know what that word meant. But I did know that people who had been my friends the day before now were not. And I learned that people who are our friends can turn against us at any moment for no good reason at all. So from 6 years old, I decided to walk alone and friendless. I decided to be a friend to myself. Not to say I haven't got friends and haven't had friends. I have a multitude of friends around the world. Now, my first grade teacher was the wife of the principal, and she asked us to draw stick figures of men and women. And I drew stick figure nudes. I put breasts on my women, I put crotches on our men. And she looked at my work and said, oh, you're an artist. And she gave me colored chalk, and she encouraged me to draw my nudes, which was terrific. I loved school. What a joy. Then I got to grade 2. And in grade 2, my teacher asked us to draw stick figures, and when she saw mine, she said, you have a dirty mind, and she beat me. Now, that was a great gift, because at 7, I realized a teacher could be wrong, because my first grade teacher was the wife of the principal, and if I'd been doing wrong, she would have told me. See? So I learned at 7 that a teacher could be wrong, and I learned, because of her, to think for myself. Only 2% of the world's global population learns to think for itself. Now, Mrs. Jacobs learned to think for herself the same way, you know? Anyway, I started showing movies at Rochdale College. And one night I was showing Mae West in her first starring movie. It's called She Done 'Em Wrong. And partway through the movie, this fellow walks in and says, Reg, do you want to do some acid? Now, I had read stories in the newspapers. I'd seen the movies they showed us in school about how drugs rotted your brains. One film made for the National Film Board had a bunch of people on acid. And I go look in a Coke bottle and go, I see the world in a Coke bottle. One girl sees a blue flame on a gas stove and she goes, the blue flame, the blue flame, the blue flame. It's a blue rose. Ah! You know, horror shit, bullshit. But we didn't know that. So I had no interest. And people said if you dropped acid, you'd think you were a bird and jump out of a window and all that kind of crap. And I had no interest in doing it. So I said, no, I don't want to do that. And he walks away. But in the movie, a young girl had tried to kill herself, and they brought her up to Mae West. And Mae West wrote her own movies, you know. And she was fierce. And the young girl says to Mae West, I've gone wrong, what man's going to want me? And Mae West fired back, listen, honey, when women go wrong, men go right after them. And I laughed, and I said, hey, you, come back here. So that night, in 1968, I dropped acid, LSD, for the first time. And I was staggered. I realized instantly that I was missing 99.9% of everything I was seeing and hearing. That literally I was blind and my eyes had been opened. Now, Buddhists got all upset about people taking LSD. They said, it's like taking a helicopter ride to the top of the mountain. Well, yes it is, you know? You save yourself from all that goddamn climbing, man. Shit! If you could save yourself all that climbing, do it. And they go on about you shouldn't smoke pot and all that other stuff. Well, pot is natural. Nature put it there. It's a resource, you know? I mean, sure, you can sit and meditate for hours and maybe think you're a good person doing your meditation, but it's easier to take a doob, man, you know? Relax. Enjoy it. Fuck this shit, you know? Do away with teachers. Do away with all teachers, you know? Stop looking for goddammit gurus. Be your own guru. Don't climb the holy mountain to talk to the wise man at the top. He's just an old fool sitting up there thinking he's better than everybody else down below, looking down his nose at them. I love down below. I love the fucking gutter, man. It's where the people are. You know, the Old Testament's written in Hebrew, but the New Testament's written in what they call Koine Greek, and the Latin translation is called the Latin Vulgate. What does that mean? Well, Koine Greek means the gutter language of the street, and Latin Vulgate means the gutter language of the street. For example, Jesus says at one point, nothing that goes into a man can harm him. It's what comes out of a man that harms him. For what goes into a man goes through him and into the King James and all your translations, into the privy or into the toilet. But the word in Greek is into the shitter, you know? Yeah, that's powerful, man. Into the shitter. Yeah, I got that. You know, Rehoboam takes over after his father. King Solomon dies, and Rehoboam's a spoiled brat, rich man's son, and he's a pain in the fucking ass. And the folks come to him and say, look, you know, just ease off, man, we'll go with you as far as you want. And Rehoboam looks at them, and in the King James and all the other translations, he says, my wrist is fatter than my father's thigh, which makes no sense at fucking all. While in the Hebrew, Rehoboam says to them, my dick, my cock, is fatter than my father's thigh. Now that makes sense, okay? So if you can't read the damn thing in Hebrew, then stop reading it, because what you're getting is a Bowdlerized translation with no balls. And Bowdlerized comes from the name of a man, Thomas Bowdler, who felt that the language in the Bible, the works of Shakespeare and many great writers, was too strong for the family. So he boasted of having produced editions of those works which had all the naughty bits taken out, and they could be safely read around the dinner table. And those are the versions that are used in the classrooms and the churches. So take all those Bowdlerized versions and throw them in the fire, for God's sake, and go out and find yourself a good, healthy, strong translation of those works with balls to it, because the word Bowdlerize means to castrate, to cut off the balls of a work of literature. So here I am, an acid on LSD for the first time, and I am just staggered by the fact that I am seeing and hearing at full fucking tilt. Wow! And the dude that gave me the acid shows up and says, hey man, how you doing? And I have nothing but love for this person. I said, wow, I had no idea. Holy Christ, this is amazing. And as I'm speaking to him, I could see into his heart. And I saw that he had nothing but contempt for me. He thought I was a complete and utter idiot. Now that didn't bother me. What bothered me was the realization that the lie is that transparent. And the first thing I learned on LSD was that I could not and should not lie. First off, because I'd never know when be somebody in front of me who could see into my soul as clearly as I could see into this guy's. And because liars deceive only themselves. As soon as they start lying, man, you can tell that they're lying if you're paying attention. Now, the important thing about LSD is this. Whatever you experience on acid, if you're paying attention, you can experience it again in the so-called normal state. Now what is that? I haven't got a fucking clue what that is, but you can incorporate it into your experience. So I realized right away, if I relied on acid for this, I would be in trouble if my supply was cut off, and that I had better learn to do this on my own. So I deliberately chose to use LSD to open doors in my mind, but once those doors were opened, it was my job to keep them open. Okay, so the movie ends, and I've got a projector, and this is back in the days of real movies, films and junk and stuff to get rid of, because I'm on acid, man. I can't take this stuff. So I go visit a friend in Rochdale, and I asked him if I could leave my gear in his place, and he said sure, and he wanted to talk to me, so I did. Got nothing to do. I listened to him, and he's sitting looking with the window behind him, and I'm looking at the night sky getting dark as midnight approaches, and it gets darker and darker and darker, and at midnight it got jet black, and then it just as a dial with past midnight it got lighter, and I thought, wow, I had no idea the transition from day to night was so swift. And I listened to him for a bit more, and then I walked home. And I'm where, I lived down at Tecumseh and Queen in a rooming house, and where I'd gone after living in that apartment on the balcony. And I went by this long, narrow restaurant. It's around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And everybody in the restaurant turned and looked as I walked by. People way down at the back of that restaurant turned and looked as I walked by. And I realized in that moment that we are all part of a cosmic consciousness. We're all part of one giant being. We're all cells in a body which is eternal, and as a result we ourselves are eternal. And then I came home, and the room I was staying in melted, and I had terrific visions, and my first thought was, Jesus, I gotta do this again, wicked. I had no idea. So I bought my first hit. That first hit was a gift. Now the first hit I bought, you see, well, it turned out I got ripped off. It was just a piece of paper. Now, a while back, a young fella asked if he could live with me, and I said, sure. And he says, I want to live with you, making it clear what that live meant. And I said, well, I'm old enough to be your grandfather. He says, I don't care. So he lived here for a while. He was terrific. We learned a lot from each other. Learning is a two-way street. You don't learn in one direction. We learn in two directions. If the old aren't receptive to the young, then the young can't teach the old, and the olds become calcified and hardened in their hearts. They think they're top shit, whatever. No, I learn. I constantly. That's why I embrace the new constantly, because it keeps you strong and vital. And after he left a copy of The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell, and I read it. And Campbell writes that when you put your foot on the path of the hero, first person you meet's an older woman who helps you, and second person you meet's an older woman who does you harm. And I went, oh my God, that happened to me in grade 1 and 2. I met this older woman, my teacher, who said, you're an artist, and she encouraged me. And in grade 2, I met this woman who said, you've got a dirty mind, and she beat me. See, path of the hero. And that goes like clockwork through your life. You'll meet someone who does you something nice. Right after you meet someone who does you something rotten. Don't get angry, just move on. So this guy gives me a hit of acid. It's wicked. I buy a hit of acid, I get ripped off. See, so that's why I'm saying this. So anyway, luckily, people who came to my shows, and Rochdale, I didn't tell you this, what they did at Rochdale, which is flippin' incredible, man. The government, under Pierre Trudeau, was persuaded to allow within Rochdale College the use of hashish, LSD, marijuana, mescaline, and peyote. It was the only place in the 1968, Toronto, the only place on earth where you could walk in off the street and meet someone and get turned on, Shit, man, it was 18 floors of people happy to turn you on. And when you got to the 18th floor, our clothes fell off and we sunbathed naked, and traffic helicopters used to ride very slowly overhead, reporting on weather conditions down below on the roof of Rochdale. It was so cool. It was insane, man. You've got no idea. I mean, in tight-ass Toronto in 1968, opened up this tower, this amazing dream tower. that was dedicated to freedom in all of its directions. Freedom of thought, freedom of exploration, freedom of sex, freedom of the soul, freedom of inquiry, freedom in capital letters, underline it, each letter a different color like the rainbow. Oh, it was a glorious place to be, although I had no idea how glorious it was until I left it. But anyway, dealers would give me acid instead of, because my shows were by donation, they are now, they were then. And that was so anybody and everybody could afford to come. So dealers would say, hey man, can I give you this, can I give you that? And they'd give me pot and stuff, and I'd pass it on. But when they gave me LSD, I used it. And I had access to the best LSD in North America, the stuff that Timothy Leary and all those guys were using. And I didn't know that then, but I know it now. So I really explored acid. And I read up on it, because when I get interested in something, I read up on it. And there's a lot of things you're not supposed to do. Those are dangerous. And one of the things you're not supposed to do is do it alone. Always do it with someone there to be your guide. Well, I fucking hate having people around me to be guides and protectors. So I loved from the start doing it alone. And you're not supposed to do it in a dark, empty room. So I went into a dark, empty room and I dropped acid. And, you know, I scared myself silly, and then I laughed because it was me scaring me. There was nothing there. And you're not supposed to be able to fall asleep on acid. So I dropped acid and tried to fall asleep, and I fell asleep. You know, I learned by doing all the things I was told not to do, I learned. And I've been doing that all my life. If they say, don't do this, this is what I do. If the Aishing says, you're going to get burned if you do this, and I do it, they find out. Am I going to get burned? Yeah, I get burned. But now I know that that's true, you see? And that's the important thing, to learn that knowledge is true. And I talk about all this in my book, which I self-published. It's called The Night They Raided Rochdale College. And this cover is by my friend Chester Brown. Chester Brown became famous for doing a comic called Yummy Fur, where the main character, Ed the Happy Clown, had the head of Richard Nixon on his dick. He had Dick's head on his dick. And it's an amazing story, and you should get a copy of it. And Chester Brown is balls out the finest living comic artist we have today. So go and find his work and read it. Anyway, I had a friend who smoked a lot of hash. And she invited me over at her place for supper, and she cooked a steak. And I'm on acid. And I go to cut that steak, and I watched it ripple, this piece of cooked dead meat. I watched it flex and ripple as the blade of my knife hit it. And I was astounded by that. And I kept poking it, just watching it ripple. And I did this for quite a while, I guess, because Kathy, in a panic, said, is there something wrong with the steak? And I said, no, the steak's fine. And I uttered that classic LSD line, it's just that I've never seen a steak before. Of course, I'd seen them millions of times. We all have. Well, hundreds or thousands, but whatever. We've seen them a lot. But I had never actually seen it. And Paul Krasner became famous. He was an American who became famous for taking the two words you weren't allowed to use in print in America at that time, and those were the words fuck and the word communism. And he designed a poster as an American flag with the words fuck communism. No one could argue, and he sold $1 million worth of those posters, and he became filthy rich. And he created a satirical magazine called The Realist, which you can find on the web. And he became infamous when he published a story in which Lyndon Baines Johnson literally fucked the bullet holes in Kennedy's head in Air Force One on the way back from Dallas after Kennedy got shot, which meant everybody was scandalized and everybody had to read that story. Well, Paul Krasner one day gets a phone call from Groucho Marx of the Marx Brothers, and he thinks he's being put on, but it's the real deal. It's actually Groucho, and Groucho said to him, I'm playing God in a movie by Otto Preminger called Skidoo, and it's all about LSD, and I've never done LSD. I've got to do LSD. Now, Groucho got his name Groucho. His real name was Julius, because when he was a young boy on the streets of New York, gutter trash, he used to carry what they called a grouch bag around his neck, in which he had various things, including your marijuana. And Marx Brother fans, oh, Groucho never smoked pot. Fuck off. What is wrong with you? Of course the man smoked pot. He was a fucking thinker, a brilliant man, as were his brothers. And they explored everything. And when you see their films, they are amazing. Oh, God, these are free people. So anyway, Groucho comes and he drops the same sort of acid that Timothy Leary was doing. It came from the Bibles that they sent to prison. These Bibles had been dipped in liquid acid, so every page was permeated with LSD. This was a way of getting it into the prisons, you see, because nobody could argue with Bibles. We're giving Bibles to convicts. Oh, great. And they dosed them with acid. So anyway, Groucho drops acid, and he goes to the bathroom. And he comes back, and he says to Paul Krasner, the whole world is looking for a miracle. And the human body is a miracle. And that's it. You know, we just keep looking outside ourselves for divine signs and fail to see that we are the divinest sign of all, man. Out of nothing came something, and that something is us. That's an amazing realization. We take it for granted, but we are something unique. So anyway, 1968, my uncle, Douglas Hartt, as I said, Director General of Public Works Canada, under Pure Trio, lived in Ottawa. He thought I had the makings of a poet. So I lived with him for about a year, and I wrote some of the worst poetry in my life while I lived there. And he sent me to the laundry one day, and a woman walked in, and she had one eye, and she had one arm, and one breast, and one leg. She hobbled zigzag on a crutch. And I just wrote out a line description of her. It broke all the rules he was teaching me, so I didn't show it to him. And he found it, and he said, that's the best damn thing you've written since you got here. So I threw out everything he was trying to teach me. And one night, we're talking, and an idea got through. And this great, vibrant, green flame, boom, burst from behind his head. And I jumped back, and he went back. And his girlfriend sitting there said, what happened? I said, I just saw his aura. Vibrant green means understanding. It was the purest vibrant green I've ever seen. He understood something. And I said, I just saw his aura. And she goes, no, you didn't. He says, yes, I did. I felt it. And, you know, this is amazing stuff. And whatever, and people don't explore it. And I'm not saying you should. You do what you feel like doing. But anyway, one night in Ottawa, I get it into my head to meditate in a bathing suit in a public park down the street at midnight on LSD. So I trot down the street to this park in a bathing suit, and I settle down on the ground in a lotus position. And along comes a mosquito and settles on my arm. And it settles right there. And I watch it pumping fluid, and then it dives in. And then it got a little antsy, like it might get killed. And I looked at it and didn't say a word out loud, but I looked at it, and in my head I said, no, it's okay. You have as much as you want. And I swear, she dove in even further, and her hind legs did a leap for joy, and she pumped up, and her belly went from ash gray to ruby red, and she pulled out when she was completely distended and couldn't take another bit, and flew off into the night, filled my LSD-laced blood, going where I'm certain no mosquito had gone before, which probably thousands, millions have gone since. And I thought for sure the next day I'd have no bites. I'd be covered in bug bites, rather. And I wasn't. And what I meditated on, because I thought, you're here to meditate on that mosquito. What I meditated on was the words of Christ when he says, this bread is my body, this wine is my blood, at the Last Supper. And for the first time in my life, I thought of myself as food. So I gave myself to that mosquito as a gift of food. I became completely detached and just observed her. And because I'd given myself to that mosquito and she was able to complete the process, she hadn't left the fluid in that she had used to tenderize my flesh so she could get in. And when we get the bug bite, when we have to fly away because we threaten them, and you leave that in, that's what creates the little bump and the sore. And if you just let them do what they're going to do, they take that out and they fly away and we're not affected by it. So if you get a mosquito on you, let her have her food. It's the females. Let her have her food. Anyway, at the end of '68, I returned to Toronto and Rochdale College, and I dream about Elvis Presley and a yellow brick road. And the next day at a party, I met a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in over a year, and he says, hey man, I'm living out in Hollywood. Elvis Presley, Yellow Brick Road. Come on out. So I caught the bus and went out to Hollywood at his invitation. And along the way, I took only one book because I wanted to read it. Because, I read in that God hates queers. And here I am a queer, and I'm traumatized by this. I read this at 14, and I became aware of myself as something evil and monstrous and meant to be killed, because I read that anybody who killed queers was doing God a favor. And I was terrified. I went from 14, small town New Brunswick, to 19, filled with self-hatred, self-loathing, all that bullshit, And I realized that I either had to jump into the goddamned ocean and swim or kill myself. So I chose to jump into the ocean. And I'm glad I did. And then en route to Hollywood, I read the New Testament cover to cover 5 times through for myself. And I can tell you, because I've since read that book way over 500 times in different translations, I can tell you that there's no authority whatever for that bullshit. God does not hate anyone except those who hate. Period. So those haters are on the wrong side of God. If you're queer, then that's the way God made you. That's the way God wants you to be. And be yourself, for Christ's sake. That takes balls. Jean Cocteau, a great French poet, filmmaker, artist, the whole 9 yards, painter, sculptor, and young queer, old queer, said, whatever the world condemns you for, it is your own, make it yourself. And that takes courage. That takes courage. William Blake said in Proverbs from Hell, he's a great English painter and poet, said, improvement makes smooth roads that are easy to travel, but the hard roads without improvement are the paths of genius. And James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses, said, the man of genius makes no mistakes. His errors are ones of volition and open new doors. Volition means conscious choice. So either you're a man of genius and you don't make any mistakes, or you're an idiot and you do. So you decide that you're a person of genius and go with that. It's better for you. So anyway, I arrive in Hollywood and my friend says, well, I'm going back to Toronto, man. So there I am. I'm there. He's going. And this dude at this party they threw that night, who looks like Charlie Manson, all fuzzy-haired and thinks he's God, gave me a sandwich to eat, and I ate it. And after I'd eaten it, he said, isn't that sandwich we gave you? I said, I haven't got a clue. He said, we gave you a elephant knockout pill. I said, well, what in God's name is that? He said, something you use to knock out an elephant. In a few moments, you won't be able to move. And I figured if I'm not going to be able to move, I'm going to get someplace where I don't mind not moving, and that's not here. Now, as I told you, I first dropped acid watching a Mae West movie, and I discovered that day that Mae West, the real Mae West, lived down the street from where I was staying in an apartment called the Ravenswood. She lived there since she arrived in Hollywood. And I wrote her a note, and I told her I thought she was a great revolutionary. I said, anybody that goes to jail for the arts are revolutionary, and I know you went to jail. And I added I couldn't believe I could get the words on paper because the whole universe was turning into peanut butter on account of this drug I'd been given. And I put it in an envelope and addressed it and walked down to that apartment building and left it for her at the front desk. And then I went off and found a park bench and let this drug pass through me because I'd read in Mark's Gospel that if you give you any deadly thing, it will not harm you. And that nothing going into a man can harm him. What goes into a man passes through him and into the shitter. It's what comes out of a man, lies and deceit and hate, that kills him. So I thought, okay, if this is true, I'll be okay. And I just relaxed and let it pass through me. It was a hell of a night. Everything turned into... You wouldn't believe it, man. And when it ended, I went for a walk to clear my head. It was a long time ending. And I went for a walk. And I let the wind lead me. And I didn't know it then, but the word spirit is Latin for breath, for wind, for air. So I didn't know it, but I was letting the spirit lead me. And the spirit led me to a shop that sold home movie equipment, cameras, projectors, and stuff like that, film. And this young man, a little bit younger than me, I'm 24, this is 1970, was looking to the clerk for answers about which projector to buy. And I said, well, that's the best one. I said, I work with those, and that's the best one. So he bought it, invited me to his home, and we watched a little porn movie, and then we did what you do naturally after watching porn movies. And after that, he said, would you care for a coffee? And I said, sure. He said, go in there and have a seat. So I went into the living room, had a seat in an easy chair, and he walks in with a mug of coffee and puts it down in front of my hand, and I go to pick it up, and right in front of that mug is a copy of the same edition of the I Ching I'd been studying in Toronto, and I'd left it with a friend in Toronto who said, don't you want to take that with you? And I'd said, no, if I need it, it'll be where I'm at. And I said, are you into that? He said, no, we had a fellow staying here who was into that. And when he left it behind. And we said, don't you want to take that with you? And he said, no, if I need it, it'll be where I'm at. And there's someone coming who's going to want to use it. Now that, I knew, was me. So I asked if I could borrow it. And I took it, and I went to Hollywood Cemetery at the grave of Douglas Fairbanks every morning after that for the next 2 weeks. And I read the I Ching and the New Testament together, and they both teach that if we trust what's in us, we become the sons of heaven, the sons and daughters of heaven, the sons and daughters of God. Meister Eckhart, a medieval thinker, said, we have the seed of God in us. Hazel seeds grow hazel trees, pear seeds grow pear trees, God's seeds grow gods. Now, a lot of folks who think themselves Christians will get all upset about that. Like, oh, no, that's not true. It is true. And John, in his gospel, in his first chapter, verses 1 to 14, ends with, to those who receive him, even to those who believe on his name, Jesus gives the power to become the begotten, not adopted, the begotten children of God. And John adds, our birth is not by flesh nor blood, nor by the will nor power of man, but by God. So by trusting in Christ, by trusting in the I Ching, we become one with the creator of all things, one with the beginning of all things. And you've got to admit, all things have a beginning. They do. And when that happens, we become timeless and eternal. And it's beautiful. So anyway, there I am at the grave of Douglas Fairbanks every morning, reading the I Ching with the New Testament and going along. And one day, one of the guys in the house, which was a house of prostitution, it was a bordello, which is not an Italian dessert, says, what do you go to that graveyard for every day? House where I was staying. I said, well, the dead don't ask questions, meaning nobody bothers me. And that day I thought, when your life is over, you're going to have eternity to line a place like this. You should get back to the land of the living. So I come back, and the guy who ran that house, I was younger and better looking then, said, we have someone who'd like to meet you, meaning they could make money with me. And I gave it a shot. I have no problem having sex with men or women. I love having sex with men and women. I love people who are strong enough to stand up to me because I'm a strong person, and people who can't stand up to me are boring. I want people who can fight with me. The word Israel means to fight with God, and that's how we learn, by wrestling with God, by wrestling with ideas, by wrestling with each other. And I want people who can wrestle with me, not just calmly go along and go, oh, he's the wise man, I mean, Chogyam Trungpa was a crazy wisdom yogin who brought 300 Buddhists from Tibet to India to escape the Chinese oppression. And of that 300, only 30 made it there alive. And then he came to Canada. Now, Buddhist prophecy had said that when the iron bird flew, then Buddhism would arrive in America. This was around 800 AD. And when the iron bird flew, Buddhism arrived in America. And he was a crazy wisdom yogin. I've been told I'm a crazy wisdom yogin. I looked it up, and the description fits. I was told that by a Tibetan Lama who said if you quote me, put a flame behind my name to indicate my rank. And he accompanied the Dalai Lama on his first journey. So he was right up there, first journey across Canada. And, I got this documentary I'm showing on this fellow, and he tells people, he gets them to put all their pot on the table. And they think, oh, it's really cool, man. He's going to smoke pot with us. And then he threw all their pot in the fire, burned it all up, wasted all that good pot, and gave them a talk on, how they shouldn't do this stuff. But the man drank like a fish, And alcohol fucking ruins your body, kills your liver. Pot doesn't do that. Hash doesn't do that. Hash doesn't destroy your body. Doesn't destroy your mind, Here's this man addicted to booze, man, throwing away all that good pot. And he's got his followers, and they go, oh, yes, you're so wise, burn our pot, burn our pot. Fuck you. Jesus Christ. Katharine Hepburn, as a young woman, when she left home to become an actress, was invited to join the Group Theater in New York, which was the most prestigious theater company in America. They invited her because her family had money. And Katharine Hepburn said, I want no part of the group dynamic. The group dynamic by nature is second rate. I will be a star. And she was lean, long, lanky, skinny, red-haired, freckle-faced. The last thing you think would be a movie star or a theater star, and she became one of the very greatest stars in the history of the theater and film, man. You gotta be your own person, be your own teacher. Fuck this looking for gurus, will you please? Oh, shit. Anyway, I'm a failure as a whore. I didn't bother taking the dude's money, man. I love his sex is too precious a thing to limit it by putting a price on it. So I was a failure as a whore. Besides which, I didn't want to get on with anybody I didn't want to get on with for money or anything else. You know, fuck that shit. And the dude runs places. You gotta help pay the rent. Well, I can't argue with that. So I'm adding the LA Free Press, make all kinds of money fast. So the next day I walked miles on an empty stomach. And I got to the front door of a thing called the Western Missionary Army of Lower California. Now here's something I want you to understand. The first time you drop acid, they say the trip only lasts 8 hours, some say 12 hours. I lean towards 12 hours. But it doesn't last 12 hours. It lasts the rest of your life. From that moment on, you're tripping. You're still tripping. It's all of this is happening now. I'm still tripping, okay? And it took me a while to realize that. But I am. I'm tripping right now. And sometimes I think, oh, I need to do acid. I need to do acid. No, I don't need to do acid. I've got the trip already happening. Man, it's cool. Just relax. And that's the big thing. Just relax. So anyway, I walked 20 miles the next morning on an empty stomach to get to the address I was given. And I get there, and it's a mission. I thought, oh, God, I want no part of this. When I got to Hollywood, after having read the New Testament, I went looking for, I didn't look for anything. I'm just walking down the street and this dude says, hey man, how are you? We chatted. He says, come with me. He took me to a mission run by an infamous man I'd never heard of, and his name escapes me for the moment. But I'm sitting there along with a bunch of other people. He's preaching the word, and he all of a sudden says, I see you, brother, here for the first time. Stand up. Tony Alamo. And I stood up. It was a command. I stood up. But with peripheral vision, which I have, I saw a whole bunch of other people stand up and thought, oh, dude does this every day. He's going to know new faces when he walks in. And he's using the power of command. I know what he's doing. And he told us all to go into this dark room down below. And we all went down to the dark room. And we're supposed to jump up and down until the Spirit of the Lord comes into us. So I jumped up and down. And I heard the still small voice saying to me, when I speak to you, it's in a still small voice. It's not you jumping up and down like a monkey. Now get your ass the fuck out of here. So I did. I rose out of that pit and I walked out, and Mr. Alamo looks at me and says, did the Lord speak to you? I said, he sure did. He said, get your ass the fuck out of here. And I walked out. And everywhere I looked, there was page after page after page of rules. These people had left home to escape mom and dad's rules, and for the sake of free rent and food, they had made themselves prisoners of pages and pages of rules. I had a fellow living here. He's from Nova Scotia, and his mother came to make sure it was okay for him to live here. And she came and she checked the place out, and she said to me, Reg, what are the house rules? I said, there's only one. And she said, what's that? I said, if I need rules, I've got the wrong person. Her jaw hit the floor. There's no rules in my life. If the wrong person is here, then I ask them to leave. Because if you don't know how to live with other people, man, then you don't know how to live with other people. Go away and come back when you do. And we're not here to be doormats, you know. Anyway, I turned to walk away from this place, and then I thought, well, you haven't had breakfast. You're not going to have lunch or supper. They've got to have coffee and donuts. For God's sake, go inside, fill out their forms, have some coffee, have some donuts, and leave. So, because I didn't want anything to do with them, I told them the truth, knowing that I couldn't get hired. I told them that I was from Canada and I didn't have a working permit. Well, the Reverend calls me into his office. He says, you're Canadian, aren't you? And as rude as I could, so he'd throw me out. I said, yeah. He says, you got a working permit? And again, as rude as I could. He says, no. I said, no. He said, well, the law says I can't hire with that one. What are you doing here? I said, I'm living in a house and it's time to pay the rent. It's either pedal my ass or get a job. And I figured I'd pedal my ass, he'd get angry, and he'd throw me out. Most folks would. I picked those words deliberately so they'd throw me out. And in fact, this is the story that Chester tells on the night they raided Rochdale on my cover. And the man looks at me and says, well, the Lord says I have to help you. The law says I can't. What do I do? I said, that's your question. And again, I thought he'd throw me out. Instead, he said, then I guess I have to help you. And he hired me and put me to work. He broke the law of the land to help me. An absolute stranger. Didn't even want to be hired. Fuck, man, I was fucked. I had to work for the guy. And good thing. Because in that instant, I learned that there's two laws. There's a law of the land that says you can't help me. There's a law of God, the law of the I Ching, the law of the Buddha, the law of Confucius, the law of love that says you must. And who we become depends entirely upon whether we keep the law of the land or we keep the law of love. And I keep the law of love. In the last judgment, the Lord says to those on his right, you saw me hungry, you saw me thirsty, you saw me homeless, you saw me naked, you saw me sick, you saw me a jailbird, you saw me a stranger. You helped me. And they go, when did we help you? He says, when you help the least, you help me. Come on in. To those on his left, he says, you saw me hungry, you saw me thirsty, you saw me homeless, you saw me naked, you saw me sick, you saw me a jailbird, you saw me a stranger. You passed me by. Now, fuck off and go to hell. And I go, when did we do that to you? He says, when you did that to the least, you did that to me. Now fuck off. Get out of here. Go where you belong. That's it. That's the last judgment. Not, oh, you're homosexual, you're going to burn in hell. No, you're a piece of shit, and you belong in hell. So go there, right now, as fast as you can. And that's where they're going to be. There are no cops in heaven, and there are no judges in heaven. And there are no popes in heaven, and no priests. Because they're not needed in heaven. They're where they're needed, which is straight in hell. That's the truth. So anyhow, I worked for a couple of weeks as a missionary, and I learned a hell of a lot. I learned more with that man than I'd learned in all my years in school. And I'm heading home, walking. It's a long way. I had a couple of beers with my fellow missionaries. I'd just gotten paid. Had to wait 2 weeks to get paid. And a cop car pulls up, because I'm hitchhiking. Big cop and the skinny cop get out, and they have Colt 45s or whatever, big pistols and big clubs and bulletproof vests, and they put on helmets with visors and gloves to deal with this 125-pound idiot from Toronto. And all I had by way of identification was a Toronto Public Library card. In 1970, you could travel from Toronto to Hollywood with only a Toronto Public Library card for identification. You have no idea how much we've lost. At all. We have lost so much since 1970. We're living in a dark age. In fact, one thing I will agree with that Chogyam Trungpa says is we are living in a dark, dark, dark time, and it's getting darker. It's going to get so dark that people are going to be scared spitless. You just be still and calm. So anyhow, the cops said to me, what did you do in Toronto? And I said, I showed films at Rochdale College. And they said, do you mean Canada's Communist Training Center? And I thought, oh my God, if the cops in Hollywood, the single most out-of-touch place on earth, know about Rochdale College, Rochdale's got to be the hippest place on earth. What am I doing here? I'm wasting my time. So I determined in that instant to get back to Toronto as soon as possible. And the cops were actually cool, man, because I was friendly with them. They gave me a ride almost all the way home. I wouldn't let them take me all the way because it would have scared the piss out of the people I was living with. And I get there, and there's a car in the driveway with Ontario plates, and I walk in, there's a 9x12 manila envelope waiting for me from Mae West. She'd read that note I left her, and inside was an autographed picture of her from the film Myra Breckenridge, and an invitation to come up and see her. So I wrote her a note of thanks, told her I was going back to Toronto to be part of Rochdale. And a week later I arrived in Toronto. The guys with the car brought me back. This is called synchronicity. When things are right, everything happens the same. It's all easy. And I walked into the office of Peter Turner, who was then president. I'd met Peter when I first met Judith Merrill. He was trying to marry her daughter, Ann Paul. Peter had come from the States, and we were friends. Well, he knew me. We weren't really friends. And I said, I want to be part of this. He said, what can you do? I said, I can give you a film program. And Peter said, then you're director of cinema studies. We can't give you any money. We don't have any. I said, well, I don't need your money. All I need is the space. but can I borrow $5 from you? And he loaned me $5, and I went to a printer and printed up some flyers, and then I began my program at Rochdale. And again, the dealers would come down to see a movie, and they say, hey man, can we give you this? And they give me whatever it was, hash, pot, grass and pot are the same thing, I know that. Other things, and they gave me LSD, lots of it. And I did awesome LSD. Now I'm going to move to the DMT part of this. When I started giving this talk in my place, I thought it'd be fun to put up a poster around Toronto saying what I learned with LSD, and I put up a poster. And people came out, and I thought, am I going to give this talk straight, or am I going to give it to them on acid? And I waited to see, and the first people that came were on acid, so I dropped it, and that was a hell of a talk. And people called and asked for it again, so I kept doing it. And one fellow who came gave me some acid he'd made, and he made beautiful acid. And he came one day and told me that he had made something called DMT, which I'd never heard of. And he said, well, he told me what it was, and if you do this, it lasts about 10 minutes, but it feels like forever. So I did it, and it lasted 10 minutes and felt like forever. And the first time I did it, I saw giant heads in the air around me, like the stone heads we see on the ground in South America. Fucking cool, because I had no internal reference for that. Second time I smoked it, me and the friend I was with turned into fluorescent human cacti. Like the colors were like those vibrant colors we see on South American art, and I was staggered by that. And then one day I did it, and I was seized on both sides by two cosmic cops who said, we've got you, at last we've got you. And they took me before this huge throne that was empty, had pulsating lights ringing it, and this voice boomed out, you've been bad. And I said, well, yeah. And the voice says, okay, you're cool, come on in. And then I thought, oh, I got to start doing talks on DMT, man. And I started giving talks on DMT. I mean, if you've done this thing once, you know about it. What's his name? The guy that, Terrence, whatever his name is, said, anything stronger than DMT, I don't want to know about it. And I'm with him. Anything stronger than DMT, man, I don't want to know about it. But we experience DMT when we die. It's let loose in our body. So if you experience DMT during your lifetime, you know, and you should experience DMT during your lifetime, then you become aware of what you're going to experience when you die, and you won't be frightened of it. So the more experience you have, the less frightened you're going to be. Okay? So I am all in favor of that. Now there's a book on DMT called The Spirit Molecule. There's a movie on DMT called The Spirit Molecule, and it's fucking bullshit. So look at it, but it's bullshit. The visuals are nice. Everything else is bullshit. Now, I've spoken to you long enough. I'm going to stop this right now. And what we're going to have is a little intermission, and then we can talk together, and you can ask me questions in the flesh, the real me in the flesh, and you can share your own experiences and talk about what you'd like to, because this is a two-way street, man. I'm not here just to sit and yap at you. I'm here to listen to you as well. So come on over, and we'll all get together. But go outside and get a breath of fresh air first. Thank you.